They thought they were picking on an easy target, a quiet old man on a bus. What they didn't know, he was a battle-hardened Vietnam veteran with lessons they'd never forget. It was just another day on the 5:15 bus, heading toward downtown Baltimore. The air inside was stuffy, packed with commuters eager to get home. Conversations buzzed softly, mingling with the occasional screech of brakes. Near the front, an elderly black man eased into his seat. His hands, rough and weathered, rested atop a cane that seemed to carry just as many years as he did. His clothes were simple, a well-worn jacket and neatly pressed slacks, reflecting someone who valued dignity over flash. No one paid him much attention at first. He was the kind of figure you'd glance at and then quickly forget, blending into the everyday scenery. But his posture carried something different. He sat tall, his gaze steady, as though no weight of the world could bend him. Yet, the faintest crease in his brow hinted at a life that had seen its share of storms. 3 seats back, a group of teenagers boarded, their laughter sharp and loud. They moved with that careless swagger of youth, scanning the bus for their next source of entertainment. One of them, a lanky boy in a bright red hoodie, caught sight of the old man. His eyes lit up, not with respect, but with mischief. He nudged his friends, whispering something that set off a chorus of snickers. The man remained still, looking out the window as the city streets blurred past. If he heard their murmurs, he gave no sign. But the boys weren't satisfied with just whispers. They wanted a reaction. "Hey, old man," the boy in red called out, his voice cutting through the hum of the bus. "You lose your walker or something? Bet you're waiting for someone to carry you home, huh?" A ripple of tension passed through the bus. Some passengers glanced at the boys, others at the man. Most, however, kept their heads down, pretending not to hear. The elderly man shifted slightly in his seat but said nothing, his eyes fixed on the world beyond the glass. Red Hoodie smirked, emboldened by the lack of resistance. He stood up, swaying slightly as the bus hit a bump. "What's wrong? Cat got your tongue, Grandpa?" The man's fingers tightened imperceptibly around the cane, but his expression remained calm. The faint flicker of something, patience maybe, flashed in his eyes. He turned his head slowly, just enough to meet the boy's gaze. And in that brief moment, something shifted. There was no anger in his look, no fear. Just a quiet, unyielding strength that seemed to settle the air around him. The boy hesitated for half a second, but his pride wouldn't let him stop now. The bus continued to rattle down the road, passengers silent and tense, as if waiting for something to happen. Little did they know, the old man's silence wasn't weakness. It was a choice that would soon change everything. The laughter from the teenagers grew louder, bouncing off the walls of the bus as if to demand attention. The boy in the red hoodie leaned closer, his voice laced with mockery. "What's the matter, old man? Too good to talk to us?" he jeered, drawing a chuckle from his friends. One of them, a stocky boy wearing a backward cap, joined in. "Probably can't hear us. You need a hearing aid too?" The elderly man remained seated, his cane now resting firmly between his knees. His face betrayed no emotion, no sign that the taunts had pierced his calm exterior. But his hands, calloused and steady, tightened ever so slightly around the worn wood. He glanced briefly at the floor, as if grounding himself in the present moment. Across the aisle, a young woman shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She shot a wary look at the teenagers, but quickly turned her attention back to her phone. A man in a grey suit adjusted his tie and buried his nose deeper into a newspaper, his discomfort obvious. No one wanted to get involved. The boy in the red hoodie smirked at the silence. "Look at him," he said, turning to his friends. "Dude probably thinks he's too good for us. What are you, some kind of king or something?" "Yeah," another boy chimed in. "You gonna knight us with that cane, Grandpa?" The taunts were sharp, their voices tinged with the recklessness of youth. They laughed louder, encouraged by the man's silence and the passenger's refusal to intervene. The old man shifted slightly, tilting his head as if observing a distant memory only he could see. "Say something," Red Hoodie demanded, his tone now edging into irritation. "Or are you scared?" The bus lurched to a stop at a red light, the sudden jolt silencing the chatter momentarily. The old man finally spoke, his voice low but firm. Respect is a lesson some people only learn the hard way. The words were simple, but they carried weight. They hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. For a moment, the teenagers exchanged glances, unsure of how to respond. But Red Hoodie quickly recovered, masking his unease with bravado. "Oh, so he talks now," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Respect, huh? That's rich coming from someone who's too scared to stand up for himself." The old man turned his head slightly, locking eyes with the boy. "You think strength is loud, don't you? You have no idea what strength looks like." The bus fell into a tense silence, every passenger now fully engaged in the unfolding drama. Even the boy's friends seemed unsure, their laughter fading into nervous grins. The light turned green, and the bus jerked forward, its passengers swaying with the motion. Red Hoodie took a step closer to the man, leaning over him with mock intimidation. "Why don't you show us then? Let's see how strong you are." The old man sighed, a long, measured exhale, as if bracing himself for what was to come. His eyes flickered toward the boy, calm, unreadable, and somehow unshakable. It wasn't just the boy who was about to get an education. Everyone on that bus was about to witness something they wouldn't forget. For a moment, the bus seemed to shrink, the tension so thick it pressed on everyone. The elderly man remained still, his cane steady between his hands. His gaze didn't waver, but in the silence that followed, his mind drifted, unbidden, to another time. 40 years ago, he had been far from Baltimore, standing knee-deep in the humid swamps of Vietnam. The air was filled with the deafening roar of helicopters and the sharp staccato bursts of gunfire. Every muscle in his body had been taut, every nerve on edge. Survival wasn't a choice. It was instinct. He had been barely more than a boy then, younger than the kids taunting him now. But war had aged him fast. He remembered the faces of his brothers in arms, men who had stood with him in those impossible moments. Some were gone now, their memories living on in fragments, like the sound of their laughter during quiet nights in camp, or the way they'd share stories of home. He had carried the weight of their loss long after the war ended, their sacrifices etched into his very being. The bus jolted over a pothole, snapping him back to the present. He straightened slightly, his grip on the cane tightening. He wasn't angry. Anger didn't come easily to him anymore. What he felt was something deeper, something more measured, a responsibility to teach these boys a lesson they clearly hadn't learned yet. Red Hoodie interrupted his thoughts with a sharp, mocking laugh. "What's the matter, Grandpa? Cat got your tongue again?" The man didn't respond. Instead, his eyes flicked over the boy, taking in everything. The posture, the bravado, the false confidence that came with not yet knowing the weight of real challenges. He'd seen it before, in young soldiers who thought they were invincible until the battlefield taught them otherwise. Across the aisle, an older woman whispered to the man next to her, her eyes darting nervously toward the scene unfolding. No one spoke up. No one intervened. The silence wasn't fear, exactly. It was more like an unspoken agreement to stay uninvolved. The man finally spoke, his voice steady and deliberate. "You remind me of someone I used to know," he said, his tone carrying an edge that stopped the boy mid-laugh. "Oh, yeah?" Red Hoodie said, trying to sound unfazed. "Who's that? Your old war buddy?" The man leaned back slightly, his gaze unwavering. "No. A young soldier who thought he was untouchable. He learned otherwise." The boy snorted, but his friends were noticeably quieter now, their smirks faltering. "Whatever, man. You're just an old has-been. Nobody cares about your stories." The man's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. Not amused, but knowing. "Careful, son. Sometimes stories are all that keep you from making the same mistakes." The words hung in the air, and for a moment even the bus seemed to hum softer. But Red Hoodie wasn't ready to back down. He stepped closer, now just inches from the old man. "You think you're so wise, huh? Why don't you prove it?" The old man's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in preparation. He adjusted his cane, his movements deliberate and slow, like a man who knew exactly what he was doing. The storm brewing inside the old man wasn't born of anger. It was forged by experience. And it was about to show these boys the meaning of strength. The bus rumbled along, its passengers frozen in the tension filling the space. The elderly man rose slowly from his seat, the cane steadying his weight as he stood. He wasn't a large man. Age had whittled away the bulk of his frame. But the way he carried himself made him seem taller, stronger. The boys watched him, their smirks fading as curiosity began to take hold. "You want me to prove something?" the man asked, his voice calm, almost quiet, yet somehow commanding the attention of everyone on board. His eyes locked onto Red Hoodie, unwavering. "Let's talk about proof." Red Hoodie chuckled nervously, taking a half step back. "What? You gonna hit me with that cane, old man?" The man's hand brushed the top of the cane, but he didn't lift it. "No," he said simply. "But I will teach you something your mouth clearly hasn't learned. Restraint." The air felt charged, the kind of energy that prickled at the back of your neck. The other passengers watched with wide eyes, some leaning forward as if not to miss a single word. "Do you think this is strength?" the man continued, gesturing at the boys posturing. "Loud words and trying to embarrass someone in public? It's not strength, it's fear. Fear that the world will see you for what you really are." The boys' friends shifted uncomfortably, their confidence visibly waning. One of them muttered, "Come on, man, let's just sit down." But Red Hoodie wasn't ready to let it go. His pride was on the line now, and he couldn't back down in front of his crew. "You don't know anything about me, old man," he shot back, though his voice lacked its earlier edge. "I know more than you think," the man replied, his voice still calm, steady. "You see this cane? It's not just a stick. It's a reminder. Every scar, every ache in these old bones comes with a story. Stories of battles fought, not with fists, but with courage, discipline, and honor. Things you wouldn't understand, because you've never had to earn them." The boy's bravado faltered. His hands clenched into fists, but he didn't move. The old man leaned in slightly, his gaze piercing. "Do you know what it's like to watch your friends die so you can live? To carry their memory with you every single day, knowing you owe them more than you can ever repay?" The words hit harder than any punch could have. The boy blinked, his jaw working as if he wanted to say something, but no words came. The bus was silent except for the rhythmic thrum of its engine, the other passengers riveted by the scene unfolding before them. "You're lucky, kid," the man continued, his tone softening just slightly. "You don't have to learn these lessons the hard way. But keep going like this, disrespecting people, thinking the world owes you something, and you'll find out soon enough. And when that day comes, you'll wish you'd listened." The boy's face turned red, not from anger, but from shame. He looked away, his shoulders slumping slightly. His friends avoided the old man's gaze, their earlier laughter now a distant memory. The bus driver glanced in the rearview mirror, his brow furrowed, but his hands steady on the wheel. No one else moved. The silence was deafening, filled only by the sound of the bus gliding down the road. The old man straightened, his posture as unyielding as ever. "Now," he said, his voice firm, "take your seat, or get off this bus." Red Hoodie hesitated for a moment, then muttered something under his breath before retreating to his seat. His friends followed, their heads bowed, their bravado shattered. The confrontation was over, but the lesson had only just begun. And it wasn't just the boys who had something to reflect on. As the teenagers sank into their seats, the tension on the bus began to ease, though the silence lingered. Passengers exchanged quiet glances, some with approval, others with disbelief. The elderly man remained standing for a moment, his grip on the cane firm but relaxed. His gaze swept over the bus, landing briefly on each passenger before he slowly returned to his seat. A middle-aged woman sitting near the front finally broke the silence. "Sir," she said, her voice hesitant but respectful. "That was brave." Her words carried a mix of admiration and guilt, as if she regretted not speaking up sooner. The man turned his head slightly, offering her a small nod. "It wasn't bravery," he replied. "Just doing what needed to be done." Behind him, Red Hoodie and his friends were unusually quiet. The boy stared out the window, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His friends whispered amongst themselves, their voices low and subdued. It was clear they had been shaken, not just by the man's words, but by the realization that their actions had consequences beyond a quick laugh. The bus rolled on, its engine humming softly. A young man near the back, wearing headphones slung around his neck, spoke up. "Vietnam, right?" he asked, his tone tentative but curious. The old man turned slightly, his expression unreadable. "Yes," he said simply. "My grandfather served there," the young man continued. "He never talked about it much, but when he did..." His voice trailed off, and he glanced down at his hands. "Thank you. For what you did. For what you gave." The old man's lips curved into a faint smile. "We all gave something," he said. "Some of us more than others." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Several passengers nodded quietly, the weight of his statement sinking in. The atmosphere on the bus had shifted entirely. Where there had been tension, now there was reflection, a shared understanding of the gravity of the moment they had just witnessed. One of the boys in the group, the stocky one with the backward cap, cleared his throat awkwardly. "Sir," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. We shouldn't have said those things." The man turned to look at him, his expression softening slightly. "Apology accepted," he said. "But remember, respect isn't something you give just because someone demands it. It's something you give because it's the right thing to do." The boy nodded quickly, his face flushed. Red Hoodie didn't say anything, but he shifted uncomfortably, clearly wrestling with his thoughts. The bus slowed as it approached the next stop. The old man glanced out the window, his eyes briefly scanning the familiar street corner. He tapped his cane once on the floor, then rose to his feet. Before he exited, he turned to face the bus, his voice carrying over the hum of the engine. "Kindness and respect cost you nothing," he said, addressing no one in particular, yet speaking to everyone. "But withholding them can cost you everything." The door hissed open, and the man stepped off, his gait steady, his presence lingering long after he was gone. The bus remained silent as it pulled away from the curb, passengers lost in their thoughts. They had witnessed more than a confrontation. They had witnessed a lesson in dignity. And for some, that lesson would stay with them long after the bus ride ended. As the bus rolled on, the atmosphere remained heavy with contemplation. Conversations that had once filled the space with idle chatter were now whispers, or silence altogether. For many on that ride, the old man's words echoed louder than any noise they'd heard all day. Red Hoodie sat slumped in his seat, his once bold posture deflated. His friends avoided eye contact with each other, their faces a mix of guilt and embarrassment. Across the aisle, the young woman who had earlier stayed silent now stared out the window, her reflection faint in the glass. She had been a bystander, like so many others, but now she questioned why she hadn't done more. The middle-aged woman near the front took out her phone but didn't use it, her fingers brushing over the screen absent-mindedly. The young man in the back who had spoken about his grandfather leaned his head back, eyes closed, lost in thought. It wasn't just a moment for the teenagers, it was a wake-up call for everyone. The lesson wasn't just about respect for elders, it was about recognizing the weight of someone's journey, the battles they've fought, and the strength it takes to walk through life with quiet dignity. As the bus reached its final stop, passengers began filing out, each carrying the moment with them in their own way. The group of teenagers exited together but walked apart, their usual boisterous energy replaced by subdued introspection. Red Hoodie paused at the corner, glancing back at the bus before shoving his hands in his pockets and walking away. For the passengers who remained, the silence spoke volumes. They had witnessed a simple truth delivered with unwavering resolve. Respect isn't earned through fear or intimidation, but through understanding and compassion. To those watching this story, ask yourself, what battles have the people around you fought? How can a single moment of kindness or respect change someone's day, or even their life? Remember, every person you meet carries a story you might never know. Treat them with the dignity they deserve. And if you found this story meaningful, don't forget to share it, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the values that truly matter. Together, we can spread these lessons and create a kinder, more compassionate world.